Hey everyone, it's Night Haro here, and today we're going to talk about weapon skill lines. So the reason probably most of you are watching this video is with update, I think 39? Yeah, 39. ZOS has made some wild changes. The first week they came out with some stuff, and honestly I looked at it and just in 2 seconds, anybody who knows a lot about the game can be like, yeah, these changes are terrible, these are not good, these are not going to stay around, and sure enough, that's what happened. Fast forward 2 weeks more. Got some different changes, not quite as bad, still quite bad, but not quite as bad. And I was going to make a joke about, Skinny Cheeks like doing his normal reviews. He often does live streams, and he just, like him staring at the screen for 20 minutes. And I was like, you know what, I don't want to be hyperbolic. So I went back and looked, and it's like 18 minutes where he doesn't say very much besides not understanding why the changes are happening. And, that's what happened. Jump forward to week 5. They made some more changes that were kind of getting close to like, okay, this is not bad. And again, they just keep iterating on it. So those kind of reasons are why I often don't cover those patch notes, is because it doesn't even seem like they're trying to do something that makes sense or is good, and really leads you to question some things about what they're doing behind the scenes over there. But you know what? The good news is, no matter what they do, I'm going to give you the information you need now. So no matter if bows become meta, two-handed, whatever, you can change your build and adapt it so that you don't need to change the entirety of your build to go to something totally different, okay? You can just swap out a couple of skill lines, because almost all the changes are with the passives from the skill line. So it might change if you were using a, two-hander before, you might want to use a bow, something else. You're using daggers, maybe you want to swap to something else, what have you. But what that does is it just changes up a couple of skills. So let's go ahead and talk about that. Okay, so just the overview here. Basically, your weapon skills come in a couple of varieties, okay? So we have our spammable, if we want to use the weapon skill spammable. Typically, you'll have something better either from your class or from, fighter skill line or some other place. But if you want to, you can use those. And sometimes they are best or very close to best in slot. So just keep that in mind. And it can also add to the flavor. Maybe you want to use it because you like the flavor of using that kind of weapon. And that really adds to it a lot. If you're an archer, but your main ability, your spammable you're hitting all the time, isn't an archery skill, it doesn't really feel as good. So, and a lot of times the damage decrease is fairly small, so it's not always the biggest deal if you're not trying to go for maximum damage in like a trial or an optimized setting. After that, we kind of have a back bar skill. Often this is an AoE skill, like something like Wall of Elements or Stampede or something like that. But basically there is usually a reason why you want to use an arena weapon on your back bar. So if you can get all the benefit from front barring some 5-piece set, then maybe on your back bar you want to use something else. And oftentimes that's an arena weapon. Well, arena weapons modify the way skills work. And what you end up getting is anywhere from like 1 to 2 to up to like 5 or 6k extra damage by having an arena weapon on your back bar instead of having double barring some 5-piece set, because again, you can get 90 to like 99% of the benefit of that 5-piece set by front barring it. So therefore you can use something like an arena weapon to get extra damage from your back bar. And again, that can vary. It's not always these AoE abilities, but it could be something like Poison Injection, which is a single target dot as well. Although typically, those aren't as good. The arena weapons are really hit and miss. Like some of them are good, most of them are just kind of garbage, unfortunately, not very useful. And, I'm someone who loves using arena weapons and wants to use more arena weapons, and I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. Okay, other than that, you kind of have your generically good dots, something like Poison Injection, where, typically you put all class skills, as many as you can, damage over time abilities on your bars, including a spammable if you need it. After that, it's usually best to go with weapon skill line skills. Those typically are the best after that. And then after that, you kind of throw in some miscellaneous skills. Now with the miscellaneous, those class agnostic skills and the weapon agnostic skills, there are some notable exceptions, mostly from the fighter skill line with Barb Trap, which provides passives just for being on your front bar, also gives you that minor force for the extra critical damage, and then is also just a really good dot. But that is a little bit the exception and not the rule. Also, you could use something like Silver Shards, which is also from the fighter skill line, as your spammable in lieu of anything else. But again, those are a bit the exception. A lot of the other ones aren't quite as good, at least currently. Although we're talking a very small margin as well. So that kind of gives you the overview of how you might want to look at this and think about it and what the rationale is behind it. Let's go ahead and talk about each skill line. And I'm not going to go through every skill because I want to go through each weapon skill line in a separate video. So today we're just going to kind of go through those that are going to you're going to want to swap out on your bar potentially. Because most of us only have anywhere from 2 to 3 weapon skill line skills on our bar at any given time. Okay, so first up here we have the two-handed skill line. We've got Stampede. This is going to be a gap closer where we charge into an enemy. Really nice to open up a fight if you're trying to get in and you're a melee combatant. It also drops a little AoE in the ground, which is nice. This is also a skill that using an arena weapon to modify it is often very beneficial, and it can be best in slot. After that, you have Carve. Carve is a really nice area, at least conal effect, kind of short range dot damage over time ability. Now, if you have short fights, I don't recommend Carve, but on longer fights, it starts off with a 12-second duration. Each cast goes up to 10 seconds, so then it goes to 22 and then to 32, and it caps out there. What that allows us to do is use a lot of our other skills, particularly our spammable, a lot more often. And so that's the other benefit of Carve, is you don't have to recast it as often. Definitely make sure you keep up Carve though. Don't let it drop off and go from 32 and have to rebuild those stacks. That can cost you a significant portion of damage. After that, we have something like Wrecking Blow. Wrecking Blow you can use as your spammable now. I'm sure many of you have seen it. You want to make sure that's on your front bar. That's where your spammable belongs for a lot of reasons, but that's a great spammable. And then after that, kind of last up here, and this is true for all of the skill lines, you usually have some sort of execute built in that's an AoE and can be really good on trash. Some of them, depending, can, historically, sometimes they've been good in single target fights, but a lot of times in trash, that's where you want to use these skills. So for us, it would be Executioner for this skill line. Now moving on to the bow skill line, we have Endless Hail. It's going to be our AoE damage ability. Also something where you might want to use like a Maelstrom staff. All the Maelstrom weapons kind of affect the AoE damage over time ability. I think for almost all the skill lines. I think that's right. So Endless Hail with a Maelstrom, bow would be something you might typically want to use, although there are other options. Similarly with like Stampede, as I mentioned before. Then we have Poison Injection. This is just a good single target dot, damage over time ability. Again, there are arena weapons that will modify this, but it ends up not quite being as good as everything else in most situations. Although you could do a fun kind of off-meta build and get something pretty close to this if you went with like double arena weapons or something like that. After that, we have Lethal Arrow. This would be our spammable if you wanted to use it, so it's something where you pull back. Again, there are some arena weapons that will modify this so that it's not just being further away that increases your damage. I believe it's the Vadishan bow, if I'm remembering correctly, and you could use that. The thing with that is, unfortunately, like Silver Shards from the Fighter's Guild skill line is really good, and it also costs stam, and it also is range, so it's kind of like, and it gives you the passive just for being on your bar, so probably Silver Shards is unfortunately going to be better in a lot of situations, unless you're solo and you can be really far from your opponent all the time, and that's not usually possible though, unfortunately. After that, we have Acid Spray for our AoE ability. This doesn't have a built-in execute unlike a lot of the other ones, but it still works really well. It has like a 5-second dot on it also, so you could, use it intermittently, but usually after about 10 seconds, everything's going to be dead. So just keep that in mind. It might be one you use in trash as kind of a spammable or just something to get that short duration dot off, and it works pretty well. Moving on to the Destro staff skill line, of course we have Wall of Elements, very classic dot that we have on our back bar, using with a Maelstrom staff, and it does good damage. Again, this is one you're looking at about 5k damage. That kind of varies from time to time, but that's about usually what you're getting from it. After that, for a single target dot, Destructive Reach will actually work. Now that sounds a little bit odd. It's not something you normally use. It's not amazing, but it is something you can use, and just keep that in mind if you're trying to do your own build. It has some upfront damage, and then it has the 20-second duration damage over time ability. And then for our spammable, we have something a little bit different here. We have Force Pulse. Force Pulse is really good when you have a couple of targets, usually 2 extra targets that you want to do damage to, because Force Pulse doesn't hit everybody like some of the other AoE skills that we'll talk about, like for trash and what have you. But it's good enough, it's also cheaper, right, than those other ones, because you can't use an AoE ability typically as a spammable in most situations. There are a few notable exceptions. So Force Pulse is used in places like Cloud Rest or Veteran Asylum Sanctorum if you're stacking a lot of the bosses so that you can get a little bit extra cleave, and it can really help. And those are the few situations where having that extra cleave is really important. Another place would be like veteran hulls of fabrication on the triplets. That could be a really good place for it if you're stacking them all together, getting some extra cleave damage. Otherwise, you're going to be able to find a better spammable in most situations. And then for our trash setup, we would use Pulsar. Again, has a built-in execute, very important for a trash spammable is to have that built-in execute. It just ends up being a significant portion of our damage, so that's what you'd use there. And then after that, our last skill line, we have dual wield. So of course, deadly cloak. This is something that's often used on our front bar, and the reason for this is because you often want to front bar daggers. So it will keep up your weapon enchants, just like all the other skills in these skill lines, has a better chance of keeping up those weapon enchants, which is another reason you want to use these like on your back bar with at least some sort of dot. And then after that, rending slashes. This is a single target damage over time ability. It's nothing to write home about. The reason this often isn't used is because on your front bar, you often have something better. Something that will not only do decent damage, but will also give you some passive benefit, or either from your weapon skill line, or either from your class skill line, or maybe from the fighter's guild in the case of Barbed Trap. So there's often times something better to use. It's actually not a bad dot though. Is it anything to write home about? Not necessarily, no, but it is a single target dot that you can use. And then after that, our spammable would be rapid strikes. So this is one where you flail your arms around. So again, a channeled spammable like many of these. So if you're using something like the deadly set, could be a good reason to use this as your spammable in lieu of your class or some other sort of spammable. It does decent damage. No reason not to use it if you want to get that kind of flare. And if you love swinging your arms around like a crazy person. After that, our last one here for AoE spammable is going to be writhing blades. Or, I'm sorry, what am I saying? Whirling blades. Whirling blades, that's where you spin, has a built-in execute, does good damage, great spammable to use. And if you're running daggers on your front bar, very easy to use. And that's it. So the idea here, guys, is that if you are using like a maelstrom weapon on your back bar and you switch to a bow or something else, then you might want to use something like Endless Hail or Wall of Elements. So those kind of skills go in that spot right there, that AoE kind of modified by a maelstrom arena weapon. If that's what you go with, that's what you put there. If you use some other skill, some other damage over time ability that is modified by an arena weapon, just make sure you have that on your bar. And then if you want to use one of these class skills as your front bar, then you can do that. Or spammable specifically, you could do that on your front bar. I've kind of went through what all of them are. And then, after that, it's just dots. Because usually what happens is you put on all your class damage over time abilities. And those are usually the best abilities you can get. Because they usually do good damage, or they do exceptional damage, and or they provide some secondary benefit, either from a passive or from some ability that they apply to a target, buff or debuff, that kind of thing. So what I mean by this, let's take Warden, for example, when you have your Fetra infection, right? That provides minor vulnerability, which increases the target's damage taken by 5%. So it does really good damage, and it also has this extra ability on it. Typically with weapon skill lines, poison injection, I keep using as a classic example. It does decent damage, but it's nothing to write home about. It doesn't have secondary abilities. It's not going to give you some other benefit, like with Nightblades. Your assassination skill line will give you extra critical chance if it's on your front bar. It doesn't do all those things. So put your class skills on, fill it in with weapon skills, and then after that you go with those classic Gnostic skills, with the notable exception of like Barbed Trap, and that's how you make a build. I'll cover that more in depth in a future video where we go through and actually I kind of break down exactly how to make a build that'll work best for you. But that'll be for a future video. Appreciate you guys watching. Let me know if you have any questions down in the comments below, and we'll catch you in the next one.